I remember the night so clearly, though it's been years. The summer of 1967 had been stiflingly hot, and the small fan in our bedroom barely moved the heavy air. I had fallen asleep early, too tired to wait up for Charles. He often stayed late at the lab, a physicist working on government contracts, projects he couldn't even tell me about. I'd grown used to his long hours, his distant gaze, the weight of secrets he carried home like invisible luggage. That night, I woke to the sound of him rummaging through the dresser. I blinked against the dark, disoriented, until I saw it, the eerie, unmistakable green glow. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. The object sat on top of the dresser, casting its sickly light across the room, painting Charles's face in shades of horror I'd never seen there before. "What is this, Margaret?" His voice was tight, strained, filled with something between fear and anger. I sat up, confused. "What are you talking about?" He pointed, hand shaking at the glow. "That. Where did you get it?" Embarrassment burned my cheeks. It had been a silly gift to myself, bought on a whim from a catalogue that promised it would spice up lonely nights. I never thought twice about it, until now. "It's just a toy," I said quietly. "For fun." Charles didn't move. He stared at it as if it might bite him. "That's not just a toy," he said slowly. "That glow, it's not normal. That's radiation, Margaret. That's uranium." My stomach turned. "That's ridiculous." But he was already wrapping it in a towel, his hands careful, deliberate. His mind had gone into that mode I knew so well, the mode that had earned him respect at the lab and fear in me. The mode where nothing else existed but the facts, the danger, the solution. "We're going to the hospital. Now." "But Charles..." "Get dressed." I did as he said, my heart pounding, my mind racing. Could it really be dangerous? It was just a toy, wasn't it? We drove through the night, the city silent around us. The only sound the hum of the tires on the road and the ragged edge of Charles's breathing. At the emergency room, he demanded tests, spoke words I didn't understand to the doctors. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching it all happen. The tests came back. The words fell like stones. Abnormal cells, advanced, urgent. Cancer. Cervical cancer. And suddenly my world shifted. The thing I thought was harmless, that I'd kept so close, had been a silent killer all along. And Charles, who had grown so distant, became my protector, my advocate, the man who refused to let me face this monster alone. The following days blurred into each other, a haze of hospital corridors, whispered consultations, and the sterile scent of antiseptic. Charles stayed by my side through it all, his fingers laced tightly with mine, as if letting go might allow the cancer to claim me faster. I saw the guilt in his eyes, a guilt that wasn't his to bear. He blamed himself for not noticing sooner, for being too consumed by his work, for not protecting me from danger that neither of us could have foreseen. But I knew the truth. The fault wasn't his. The fault was in the world that made such things, sold such things, without a thought to what they might do. The catalogues, the factories, the hands that shaped the uranium-infused plastic and shipped it off as harmless fun. And me, for trusting too easily. The treatments began almost immediately. The doctors spoke of urgency, of aggressive cells, of how lucky, if such a word could be used, we were to have caught it when we did. Lucky that Charles recognized the glow for what it was. Lucky that we had acted fast. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, betrayed by something I had brought into my own home, into my own body. At night, Charles and I lay awake in the hospital room, listening to the soft beeps of machines, the quiet footfalls of nurses. We talked in hushed tones, like conspirators. "I should have noticed," he'd say, voice heavy with sorrow. "You did," I'd whisper. "In time." And that was the truth. Because of him, I was fighting now. Because of him, I had a chance. As the days turned into weeks, I began to see the depth of Charles's love in a way I hadn't for years. Gone was the distracted scientist, always lost in his calculations. In his place was the man I'd fallen in love with, fierce, loyal, unyielding. I was scared. God, I was terrified. But I wasn't alone. And in that, I found a kind of strength I didn't know I had. The treatments were brutal. Radiation, surgeries, endless tests. I watched my body weaken, my hair thin, my skin pale beneath the hospital's fluorescent lights. But I also watched Charles grow stronger in ways I never expected. He became my advocate at every turn, questioning doctors, researching treatments late into the night, using his knowledge of radiation to challenge protocols, to demand second opinions. The same mind that had once been buried in equations and government secrets was now laser-focused on one mission, saving me. At first, I resented the pity I saw in the eyes of nurses, of visitors, of friends who came bearing flowers and sad smiles. But Charles taught me to see it differently. "They don't pity you," he said one night, as we sat together by the window watching dawn break over the city. "They admire you. They see your fight." And I began to believe it. In those long weeks, I thought often about that night, about the glow that had exposed the danger. I imagined what might have happened if Charles hadn't seen it, if he hadn't known what it meant. How long would I have waited to see a doctor? How far would the cancer have spread before anyone realized? I also thought about how fragile everything was, how something so small, a foolish little toy, a bit of glowing plastic, could unravel a life. But I refused to let it be the end of mine. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the nausea and pain felt too much to bear. And every time, Charles was there, with cool cloths, with whispered encouragement, with steady hands that reminded me I wasn't in this fight alone. We found moments of grace even in that bleak place, a shared joke that made us both laugh until tears streamed down our faces. The warmth of sunlight on my face as he wheeled me into the hospital courtyard. The quiet strength of simply holding each other's hands in the dark. And slowly, so slowly, I began to heal. The first time the doctor said the word remission, I barely dared to believe it. Charles gripped my hand so tightly I thought our bones would fuse together. I saw the tears in his eyes, the man who never cried, undone by that single word that meant hope, meant life, meant we had clawed our way back from the edge. But remission wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new one, a life forever changed, shadowed by what we'd survived, but lit by the strength we'd found. When I finally came home, the house felt unfamiliar. The dresser, the room, the bed where the nightmare had started. It was all the same, but I was not. Charles had cleared it all out. The catalogues, the foolish purchases, anything that might remind us of that glowing green horror. He even repainted the bedroom walls as if to scrub away the memory. "I want you to feel safe here," he said simply. And I did. Because safety, I realized, wasn't in walls or locks or the absence of danger. It was in the people who stood with you when the worst happened. We talked often in the quiet of the evening shanks about what we'd endured. Charles admitted his guilt, his fear. I admitted my shame, that something so small, so trivial, had nearly cost me my life. But together we chose not to let those feelings define us. We planted a small garden behind the house. Tomatoes, herbs, flowers that thrived in the California sun. A place where things could grow, where we could watch life push its way out of the soil and into the light. And as I knelt there one morning, hands in the dirt, Charles beside me, I realized the glow that had nearly destroyed me had, in the strangest of ways, also saved me, because it had shown me what truly mattered. In the months that followed my return home, life settled into a strange rhythm. The fear never left completely, like a faint hum beneath the surface of every day. But with each sunrise, I felt stronger, as if my body and my spirit were learning how to live again. Charles and I spent long mornings in the garden, our hands in the soil, our hearts slowly stitching themselves back together. The simple act of planting seeds, of watching green shoots push through the dirt, became our therapy. Every leaf, every bloom felt like a small victory. We spoke more openly than we ever had before, about the years we'd let slip away, caught up in work and worries and the silent distance that had grown between us, about the terror of those hospital nights, about the guilt we both carried, though neither of us deserved it. And in those conversations, we found each other again. Charles brought home books on gardening, on nutrition, on living well after cancer. He cooked meals rich with colour and flavour, determined to help my body heal from the inside out. We took slow walks through the neighbourhood, pausing to admire flowers or chat with neighbours. Small moments that felt monumental after all we'd endured. I wrote too, pages and pages in a simple journal, pouring out the memories, the fears, the hopes I didn't always have the courage to speak aloud. The act of writing helped me make sense of it all, the betrayal of my own body, the miracle of Charles's discovery, the fragile gift of this second chance. And at night, when the house was quiet and the garden bathed in moonlight, I would stand at the window and whisper my thanks. Not to any god in particular, but to the universe, to fate, to Charles, to the glow that had been both curse and salvation. Because I was still here, and that meant everything. His garden became our sanctuary, a place where the world felt simpler, where danger seemed distant, where life grew despite all that had tried to stop it. Charles built raised beds so I wouldn't have to bend too far. He fashioned trellises for the tomatoes, laid stepping stones between the rows. Every piece of it was touched by his hands, shaped by his love. Neighbours began to notice. They would pause at the gate, compliment the blooms, ask for tips on their own gardens. Some had heard whispers of what we'd been through, the illness, the strange object that had nearly stolen me away. But no one asked directly, and for that, I was grateful. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Mrs. Green brought over a basket of fresh peaches. "I see you out here every day," she said with a smile. "You're an inspiration, dear. It's good to see someone choose to bloom after all that rain." Her words stayed with me. That's what I was trying to do. Bloom, not just survive, but truly live. Charles, too, seemed lighter. The man who once carried the weight of the world in his furrowed brow now laughed more, worked with joy in his hands, found comfort in the simple rhythm of tending the earth. We talked about building a greenhouse, about adding fruit trees, about inviting local school children to learn about growing their own food. At night, we sat on the porch, the air rich with the scent of jasmine and tomato vines, and we dreamed aloud, dreams we'd been too afraid to speak before. And still, sometimes, I'd wake in the dark, heart racing, the memory of that green glow flashing behind my eyelids. But those moments came less often, and when they did, I'd reach for Charles's hand, and he'd be there, solid and steady, a reminder that we'd faced the worst and chosen to keep walking forward together. As summer deepened, so did the roots of our new life. The garden flourished beyond what we could have imagined. Tomatoes grew heavy on the vine, marigolds lined the beds like golden sentinels, and bees hummed from blossom to blossom, reminding us that life, even fragile life, persisted. Charles and I began inviting friends and neighbours for small gatherings. Nothing fancy, just simple meals shared beneath the shade of our old elm. We laughed together, we broke bread, we told stories. And slowly the house that had once felt haunted by fear began to feel like home again. There were moments, of course, when the shadows returned. A flicker of green on a television screen would tighten my chest. The smell of antiseptic could make my knees weak. But each time, I reminded myself, that is behind me, I am here now, I am whole. Charles continued to surprise me. He found ways to weave his knowledge of science into our healing, testing soil for nutrients, designing irrigation for the garden, even teaching the neighborhood children about photosynthesis with the patience and passion I'd first fallen in love with decades earlier. Together, we planned for the future. We dreamed of expanding the garden, of creating a space for others to heal as we had, a place where what was planted wasn't just food, but hope. And as the season began its slow turn toward autumn, I stood at the edge of our little paradise, the setting sun casting the world in gold, and I whispered to myself, we survived. And now, we grow. As the first cool winds of autumn swept through our garden, I felt the subtle shift, not just in the season, but in myself. I was no longer simply surviving. I was rebuilding. Every morning, as I stepped outside to greet the day, the crisp air filled my lungs and reminded me that I had been given the gift of time, and I intended to use it well. Charles and I expanded our garden, just as we had dreamed. We cleared a corner of the yard for fruit trees, apples, pears, peaches. We built a compost heap, laughing together at the mess, at how far we'd come from the sterile, fearful days of hospital corridors and beeping machines. The earth became our partner in healing, its quiet promise that life goes on, steadying us both. Neighbours noticed our work and offered to help. The Johnson boys came by on weekends, hauling stones to border the beds. Mrs. Green donated saplings from her own yard. Even the shy widower down the block stopped to share cuttings from his prize roses. Our garden became not just ours, but part of something larger, a patchwork of kindness stitched together by shared labour and simple joys. Charles seemed to shed his old weight too. The man who once carried the burden of secret government work, of fears he could never voice, now spoke openly about science, about nature, about the wonder he found in both. I watched him teach neighborhood children how to graft a branch, how to test soil pH, how to spot healthy worms in the compost. And with every lesson, I saw the light return to his eyes. In the evenings, we sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink low, painting the garden in hues of amber and rose. We spoke of the future, of building a greenhouse, of starting a community plot, of inviting schools to bring their students. The glow that had once signaled death had led us here, to this place of life, of growth, of hope. And though fear still flickered in quiet moments, in a dream, in the flash of green neon in a shop window, I no longer let it rule me. I had chosen, again and again, to plant something better in its place. As autumn deepened, the garden became a tapestry of gold and crimson, the beds resting beneath fallen leaves, the fruit trees shedding the last of their bounty. But even as the plants prepared for winter's sleep, the spirit of what we'd built it continued to grow. The community began to see our garden not just as a patch of earth, but as a symbol of resilience, of second chances, of what could bloom even after the darkest storms. Charles and I were invited to speak at a local school, to share our journey. I hesitated at first, the thought of standing before strangers, stirring the old fears. What if they judged me? What if they saw only the woman who had been fooled by something so small, so deadly? But Charles, steady as ever, took my hand. "They'll see what I see," he said. "A woman stronger than what tried to break her." So we spoke. We told our story, of the glow in the night, of the race to the hospital, of the battle we fought together. We spoke of science, of caution, of the strange ways in which danger can wear a harmless face. And we spoke of hope, of healing, of the garden that had become our way forward. The students listened, wide-eyed, full of questions, of wonder. They asked about the science, about the garden, about how to plant seeds of their own. And I realized this was our gift. Not just survival, but sharing what we'd learned so others might find their own path through fear. Back home, as the first frost silvered the garden beds, Charles and I stood together beneath the stars. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his arm around my shoulders, the quiet strength that had carried us both. And as I looked out over the resting garden, I felt it in my bones, in my heart. We had turned poison into purpose. And we would keep planting, keep teaching, keep growing. Winter settled over our town, with a quiet that felt both heavy and peaceful. The garden lay beneath its blanket of snow, the bare branches of our fruit trees etched against grey skies like lines in an old book. But inside our home, there was warmth, the crackle of the fire, the scent of Charles's stews, the soft hum of life we had fought so hard to protect. With the garden resting, we turned our attention to planning. Charles designed a small greenhouse we could build come spring, drawing careful diagrams at the kitchen table, his mind as sharp and focused as I'd ever seen it. I began writing down recipes, lessons from the garden, reflections on what we'd been through, a little book I hoped one day to share with others. Our neighbours didn't forget us in the cold months. They came by with pies, with fresh bread, with offers to help when the snow piled high. Children knocked on our door to ask questions about plants, about science, about how the world worked. Charles took to keeping small experiments ready to show them, ice melting at different rates, seeds sprouting on wet paper towels in glass jars. And I watched as their wonder became his joy. We spoke often of the night that changed everything, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Gratitude that Charles had seen the danger, that we had acted in time, that we had been given the chance to turn pain into purpose. There were moments, of course, when shadows crept in, when a certain light would catch the edge of a glass and remind me of that green glow, when the hush of the snow reminded me of hospital quiet. But those moments no longer ruled me. They came, and they passed, like the winter winds outside our window. And as the days slowly lengthened, as the promise of spring stirred beneath the frozen ground, I felt ready for whatever came next, ready to continue the work we'd begun. Because the true garden, I had learned, wasn't in the soil. It was in the love we'd tended, the hope we'd planted, the strength we'd grown together. Spring came as a soft promise, the kind that seeps into the world quietly, until one morning you wake to birdsong and the scent of damp earth. The snow melted from our garden, revealing beds ready for planting, paths we'd built with care, and trellises waiting to support new life. Charles and I worked side by side as we had before. The greenhouse took shape, pane by pane, until it stood like a glass jewel in the corner of our yard. Inside we nurtured seedlings, tomatoes, herbs, wildflowers, each one a symbol of resilience, of what could grow even after devastation. Our neighbours joined in. Children came to plant sunflowers and marigolds, to press seeds into the soil with small, eager fingers. Older folks brought cuttings from their own gardens, sharing stories as they worked. The garden became a shared space, a place where people found purpose, peace, connection. And Daniel, a boy from down the street, asked to help more. He reminded me, in quiet moments, of the son I'd never had, or perhaps the one I'd lost and found again in Charles. Together we taught him how to graft a branch, how to spot good soil, how to care for tender shoots. Watching him learn, watching Charles guide him with patience, filled a space in me I hadn't realized was still empty. At night, we sat on the porch, the garden bathed in moonlight. The fear that had once haunted me, of glowing green, of silent killers hidden in ordinary things, no longer held its power. I had learned to see the light differently, not as a warning of death, but as a reminder. Even the darkest glow can lead you back to the path of life, if you choose to follow it. Our story spread. The school invited us again. Local papers wrote about our garden, about the work we'd done. People came not for pity, but for hope, to see how something beautiful could grow from what nearly destroyed us. And as the garden bloomed that year, so did we. Not just survivors, not just grateful, but whole. Because in tending the earth, we had tended ourselves. And the true harvest was this: love, resilience, and the quiet certainty that we had turned darkness into light.